Lumbridge is probably one of the most iconic towns in old school RuneScape. In this series, I will be working to build a scale model of it. For those new to the series and to those returning, welcome. I really appreciate all the support we received on the series so far. In case you don't remember, this model is approximately 56 tiles across and 72 tiles long. I felt like this captured the main part of Lumbridge while keeping the model to a manageable size. The scale of the model is 1 to 192, so in other words, 1 inch is equivalent to 192 theoretical inches in the game. In this episode, I will be tackling the Cooking Tutors building and Bob's brilliant axes. I started by cutting the rough shapes of the buildings out using a foam cutter. Then I set up my angle guide on my wire cutter and cut the roofs of the buildings out after doing a little trigonometry to calculate the correct pitch of each roof. As you can see, I did have a little trouble while cutting out the smaller roof sections, but eventually I prevailed. And here's a rough layout of the two buildings. I began with the Cooking Tutor's house by marking out the doorway so I could avoid it in the next steps as I began to cut and emboss the blocks. Here you can see a crazy contraption I made to help me cut the stones out on the buildings. It consists of a bolt with 10 razor blades and washers between these to get the correct spacing. Not exactly the safest tool, as there isn't really a good way to grab it, but it is very effective. Inside this building, you'll find Cordero, the cooking tutor, as well as one of the 2 cooking ranges located in Lumbridge. For those of you who are monolingual, such as myself, Cordero is actually Spanish for lamb. The RuneScape developers actually sprinkle in tons of these play on words throughout the game if you look for it. When you talk to him, he'll explain how to make various foodstuffs such as pizzas, pies, and curries. Unfortunately, with tools such as the old school RuneScape wiki page, the cooking tutor is pretty much dead content, but go ahead and give him a visit though. I've been playing RuneScape for about 18 years now and never knew what was in this building until I started making the series. With the embossing done, you can really start to see the building take shape. I did forget to cut the 2 windows out on the back, but I corrected this mistake later on in the video. I went ahead and glued the roof on now and used the end of a mechanical pencil to emboss shingles onto it. Moving on now to Bob's brilliant axe shop, I again started by marking out the doors as well as the windows so I could avoid cutting these sections with my new brick cutting tool. then did the same process on what I assume is Bob's attached living quarters. And with all the bricks embossed, I glued the 3 sections together. Then moving on to attaching the roofs. While I let that dry, I decided to move over to the swamp area, and went ahead and loaded my airbrush up with some darker green, so I could color the grass in the swamp area. Moving back to finish embossing Bob's Brilliant Axe Shop, I went ahead and used the same method as I used on the Cooking Tutors building. Next, I coated both buildings in Mod Podge to strengthen the foam and lock the embossings in place. While I let that dry, I went ahead and tackled the 6 dead trees that show up in the swamp area on this model. Using a length of wire, I twisted each tree into the general shape of a dead tree. I then dipped each in Mod Podge off camera to help fill in some of the wire gaps. While I let those trees dry, I put a base coat of black onto each of the buildings to get them ready to be dry brushed later. Moving right along to the fence that separates the main town of Lumbridge from the Lumbridge swamp, I took some small strips of polystyrene and then meticulously glued each of the fence posts in place, leaving a few long to help better attach the fence to the board later on. Off camera, I spray painted the trees brown, then taking some dark brown wash, went over each of the trees to darken them up some. I then carefully glued each into place. While these are dead trees, they do still yield a regular log when cut down. Now with the black base coat dry, I can begin to bring out the details using a painting technique called dry brushing. Next, I painted the roofs of the buildings, and while I made the roofs a little more orange than they are in game, I still think it captures the idea of the buildings well. As you watch me paint out some of the details on the buildings, I'll take this time to give a little more information on Bob, the owner of Bob's Brilliant Axes. While his store is somewhat lacking in use for most players, except maybe some Iron Men early on, who may go there to buy a steel axe, which Bob sells for a very competitive rate of 200 GP, which by the way is the cheapest of the 4 vendors that sells steel axes. He does offer a very valuable service though, in that he can repair Barrow's equipment. Bob is one of only 5 NPCs that can perform this service, and this is invaluable for players that have not yet reached 55 construction to build an armor stand in their player-owned house. It is quite a bit more expensive though to have Bob repair your Barrow's equipment, so if you haven't reached 55 construction yet, here's your call to action to get it done, because it will save you a lot of GP in the long run. With the fence dry, I can actually start placing everything onto the model. Nearly forgetting Bob's Brilliant Axes sign, I quickly made one using polystyrene and foam. And And with that, a couple more buildings and trees are added to the model. These awesome additions further bring this model and this iconic town to life. If you enjoyed listening to the model making process, as well as the interesting lore and facts surrounding this town, go ahead and like and subscribe so you can join us again in a couple weeks as I continue to build out the town of Lumbridge.